My name was on the list on the 11th night. I need to get that out right now up front because I want you to understand the kind of certainty I'm talking about. Not a name that sounded like mine. Not static that my tired brain shaped into syllables. My full legal name, spoken in a voice that I will describe to you when I can find the right words for it. Broadcast through a Motorola two-way radio that was turned off and unplugged and sitting in a drawer I had duct-taped shut. I'm going to tell you everything that happened between when I arrived at Spruce Peak Lookout and when I came down. Some of it I've told to the Forest Service in an official capacity. Most of it I haven't told anyone. All of it is true in the way that things are true when you've experienced them alone, in a room above the tree line, where the nearest human being is 11 miles of switchback trail away, and the sky is so vast and indifferent that your own existence starts to feel grammatically optional, like a sentence that would read just fine without you in it. I should tell you who I am, because it matters. Not for sympathy, for context. My name is Theo Aldiss. I'm 26. I have a master's degree in ecology from the University of Montana in Missoula, which I completed in May of 2025, and which cost me roughly $74,000 when you account for the undergraduate work that preceded it. I want you to hold that number because it's the number that was in my head when I applied for seasonal fire lookout positions with the U.S. Forest Service, and it's the number that turned a job most people would consider lonely and strange into something that felt to me like a rational choice. I wasn't desperate. That's important. I had options. I'd been offered a field research position with a conservation nonprofit in Bozeman, $38,000 a year, which is a salary that would have required a roommate and a meal plan, and the kind of careful, grinding austerity that I'd already been living with for 6 years. I'd been offered a teaching assistantship back at UM, which would have been another year in Missoula, another year of office hours and undergraduate lab sections, and the particular loneliness of being 26 in a town full of 21-year-olds who were still excited about things I'd stopped being excited about. The lookout job paid less than either, but it came with no rent, no commute, no grocery bill, and 4 months of solitude that I genuinely wanted. I'd spent 6 years in classrooms and labs and shared apartments, performing the social rituals of graduate school, and I was tired in a way that wasn't physical. I wanted to be alone. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sit in a glass room above the Bitterroot Mountains and watch for smoke and think about nothing, and let the loan payments auto-debit from a checking account I didn't have to look at. That's not desperation. That's preference. And the distinction matters because it means I didn't take this job with the resigned, beaten-down acceptance of a person who had no choice. I took it with enthusiasm. I researched it. I read Edward Abbey. I read the Forest Service's Historical Lookout Program documentation. I watched YouTube videos of former lookout staffers talking about their experiences. The beauty, the silence, the stars. The slow transformation that happens when you remove a human being from the species for long enough that the species starts to feel like something that happened to someone else. I wanted all of that. I went looking for it. What I found was different. Spruce Peak Lookout sits at 7,340 feet in the Bitterroot National Forest, about 20 miles south of Darby, Montana, near the Idaho border. It's a standard 14 by 14 foot cab on a 40-foot steel tower built in 1953 and retrofitted twice since, once in the 80s for structural reinforcement, and once in 2011 for solar panels and a composting toilet at the base. It's accessed by an 11-mile trail from a gravel trailhead off Highway 473, the last 3 miles of which are steep enough that the Forest Service recommends against attempting them with more than 40 pounds on your back. There's a pack mule service that brings up bulk supplies at the start of the season and twice during. Everything else you carry. I arrived on June 18th, 2025. The hike took me 7 hours. The last hour was above tree line, crossing a granite saddle where the wind was constant and sharp, and the views opened up in every direction. The Bitterroot Valley to the east, the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness to the west, an ocean of dark green timber broken by granite ridges, and far to the south, the white teeth of the Frank Church Mountains. It was beautiful. Staggeringly, almost offensively beautiful. The kind of landscape that makes your problems feel like accounting errors in a ledger that no one is reading. The tower was smaller than I expected. The cab was snug. A single room with windows on all four sides, a cot, a propane stove, a desk with the Osborne firefinder mounted on it, storage shelves, and the radio setup. The radio was a Motorola base unit hardwired to the solar system with a handheld backup. There was no cell service, no internet. Communication was radio only, to the Derby Ranger District office, which was staffed during business hours and had an after-hours answering relay that went to the district duty officer. The person who briefed me was a woman named Packer. First name or last I never found out. Everyone called her Packer, including, apparently, herself. She was the West Fork District Fire Management Officer, mid-50s, lean and sunburned and precise in the way of someone who has spent decades in an organization that values precision, because imprecision gets people burned alive. She'd hiked up with me, matching my pace easily despite being twice my age, carrying a clipboard in a canvas bag that turned out to contain the things she couldn't trust the mule service with. She showed me the cab, the firefinder, the radio protocol, the supply cache, the water system, the lightning position. You crouch on the wooden stool with your feet off the floor if a storm comes in, because the tower is essentially a lightning rod and the glass insulators on the support legs will ground a strike, but only if you're not touching anything metal, which is almost everything. She showed me the logbook, the weather instruments, the flare kit, the satellite phone in its pelican case for genuine emergencies. Then she opened the canvas bag and took out a 3-ring binder, black, unlabeled, about 30 pages. "This isn't in the standard lookout manual," she said. "This is specific to Spruce Peak. Every lookout who's staffed this tower since 1993 has received this binder. You're going to read it tonight. You're going to follow it exactly. And you're not going to call me on the radio to discuss it, because the radio is part of what the binder addresses." She set it on the desk, next to the firefinder. "Packer," I said. "What is this?" "Read it tonight." She picked up her empty pack. She was already moving toward the trap door that led down the tower steps. "I'll check in with you by radio tomorrow at 0800. If you have questions, then ask them, but read it first. All of it." "Is this some kind of hazing thing? Scare the new lookout?" She stopped at the trap door. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders change. A small contraction, like a flinch she'd learned to make small. "Theo," she said. "In 1993, a lookout named David Purcell staffed this tower. He didn't have a binder. He didn't know the protocols. On the 14th night, he walked off the tower catwalk at 11 p.m. The fall didn't kill him. The walk afterward did. They found him 4 miles west in the wilderness, in a drainage that's not on any trail. He was barefoot. His boots were still in the cab. His logbook was open to a page where he'd written a list of names, 42 names, over and over, in handwriting that got larger and less controlled the further down the page it went. She looked at me then, over her shoulder. "The binder is not hazing. Read it. Follow it. You'll be fine." She went down the steps. I listened to her boots on the steel until the sound faded into the wind, and then I was alone on the mountain, and the sun was still high, and the binder was on the desk, and I didn't open it for 2 hours because I was 26 and educated and rational, and I needed those 2 hours to stand on the catwalk and look at the mountains and convince myself that whatever was in that binder was the product of institutional superstition in a federal agency that had been staffing remote towers with isolated people for 70 years and had probably generated all manner of folklore. Then the sun started going down, and I opened the binder. It wasn't formatted like a government document. That was the first thing I noticed. No Forest Service header, no form numbers, no bureaucratic language. It was typed, cleanly, in a serif font on plain white paper, and it read like something a single person had written carefully over a long period and revised multiple times. There were section headers, but no table of contents. Some passages were clinical. Others were almost conversational, as if the author had been unable to maintain professional distance and had let their own voice leak through. I'm not going to reproduce the whole binder. 30 pages is too much, and some of it is procedural. Weather reporting protocols, firefinder calibration, supply management. That has nothing to do with what I need to tell you. But I'm going to give you the sections that matter, as close to verbatim as I can recall. The first relevant section was headed, "The Radio After Sunset." Beginning at sunset. Defined as the moment the sun's disk is fully below the visible horizon from the cab, the base radio unit will begin receiving a transmission on the primary channel, 168.625 MHz. This transmission will consist of a voice reading a list of names. The voice is calm, measured, and clear. It will read continuously until sunrise. The following rules apply. 1. Do not respond to the transmission. Do not key the mic. Do not acknowledge the voice in any way, including verbally, even if you believe the radio cannot transmit. 2. Do not write down the names. Do not attempt to remember them. If you find yourself mentally repeating a name you've heard, redirect your attention to a physical task. Wash a dish, fold a blanket, count the rivets on the firefinder. The names are not meant for you. 3. Do not turn the radio off. The transmission occurs whether the radio is on or off, whether it is plugged in or unplugged, whether it is in the cab or outside the cab. Turning the radio off does not stop the transmission. It stops you from being able to hear when the transmission changes, which is information you need. 4. At some point during the night, the time varies, the voice will pause. The pause will last between 10 and 45 seconds. During the pause, you will hear a tone. The tone is a single sustained note, approximately 440 Hz. When you hear this tone, close your eyes and do not open them until the voice resumes reading names. The tone is not dangerous. What you would see during the tone is 5. If you hear your own name, do not react. Continue whatever you are doing. Your name on the list does not mean what you think it means. Your name is being read because you are present on the mountain. It is a record of proximity, not a sentence. You are safe as long as you do not answer. 6. The voice will occasionally ask a question. The question will be personal. It will reference something specific to you. A memory, a regret, a fear, a name you haven't spoken in years. This is not evidence that the voice knows you. It is evidence that the mountain knows you are there, in the way that a landscape knows weather is happening to it. Do not answer. Do not engage. The question is a door. Answering opens it. There is nothing on the other side that you want. 7. Between midnight and 3 a.m., the voice may be joined by other voices. These voices will also read names. They may sound like people you know. They are not people you know. They are the mountain's memory of people who answered. That was the end of that section. I read it twice. The sun was behind the Bitterroots, the sky going from gold to violet, and the cab was filling with the thin, blue light of mountain dusk that makes everything look like it's being remembered rather than seen. I looked at the radio. It was on, tuned to the primary frequency, the squelch turned down low. It was silent. Then the last sliver of light left the sky and the radio started talking. I want to describe the voice because I think the voice is the thing that makes this story different from what you're imagining. You're imagining something eerie, something ghostly or distorted, or obviously wrong. The kind of voice you'd hear in a horror movie, processed and deepened and dripping with menace. It wasn't like that. The voice was a man's voice, and it was the most ordinary voice I've ever heard. A mid-range American baritone, no regional accent I could identify, speaking at the pace of someone reading a phone book or a voter registry or a casualty list. It had the quality of a voice that had been reading for a very long time, not tired, not strained, but settled into the task, the way a river is settled into its bed. It sounded like a man who had been doing this so long that the reading had become a resting state. And the names were just names. Patricia Ann Mosley, Robert Devereaux, Carmen Lucia Villanueva, Thomas Birch Whitaker III, Sung Ho Park, Delilah Faye Compton. On and on. One every 4 or 5 seconds. No inflection, no emphasis, no pattern I could detect. American names, all of them, or at least names that sounded American. A mix of every ethnicity and origin, as though the list were drawn from a census of the entire country. Some had middle names, some didn't, some were old-fashioned. Albert, Clementine, Horace, and some were modern. There was no alphabetical order, no grouping, just names, falling out of the radio like water from a faucet. I sat on my cot and I listened for about 10 minutes, and then I did what the binder said. I stopped listening. I washed the dishes from dinner. I organized my supply shelf. I counted the rivets on the fire finder. There are 47. I ended up knowing that number very well. And the voice kept reading, and the names kept falling, and the dark pressed against the glass on all 4 sides. And I was alone on a mountain in Montana with a voice that would not stop cataloging human beings. And I did not sleep until almost 3 a.m., when exhaustion finally pulled me under. In the morning, the radio was silent. I called Packer at 8. "I read the binder," I said. "I heard the transmission." "Copy that." "Questions?" I had 100 questions, but the one I asked was, "Who's reading?" Packer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The binder covers everything you need to know operationally. If you follow the protocols, you'll have a safe, productive season. Packer out." She ended the transmission. I sat with the dead radio and the morning sun making the cab warm and bright, and I thought, okay, this is the job. The job includes this. I was an ecologist. I understood systems. And I understood that some systems have components you don't fully comprehend, but that function reliably as long as you don't interfere with them. The names on the radio were a component. The binder was the operating manual. I would follow the manual. That was the rational decision, the scientific decision, the decision of a man with a master's degree and a methodical mind and $74,000 in debt and a summer to get through. It lasted about 9 days. Here's what they don't tell you about fire lookouts, the thing the romanticized versions leave out. Your mind changes. Not slowly like people warn you about. Quickly. Within a week, the absence of other human beings starts to restructure the way you think. Your interior monologue gets louder. The boundary between thinking and speaking dissolves. I caught myself narrating my own actions out loud by day 3. By day 5, I was having full conversations with myself, both parts, asking and answering. By day 7, the difference between a thought and a perception had gotten blurry in a way that was subtle enough to be unnerving. And the names didn't help. Because here's what the binder said. Do not attempt to remember them. And here's what my brain did. Remembered them. Not all of them. The list ran for 12 hours a night, hundreds of names, maybe thousands. But certain names stuck. They'd surface during the day unprompted while I was scanning the horizon or boiling water or writing in my logbook. Carmen Lucia Villanueva. I'd be eating lunch and her name would be there, in my mouth, like I'd been about to say it. Thomas Birch Whitaker III. I'd be falling asleep and his name would fall through my mind like a leaf settling onto still water. I started to wonder about them. Who was Patricia Ann Mosley? Where did she live? Was she alive? The list had to come from somewhere. These were real names. Too specific, too varied, too human to be generated randomly. Somebody somewhere had been or was a Patricia Ann Mosley. And her name was being read every night from a radio in a tower on a mountain where nobody could hear it except the lookout and the trees and whatever else was listening. On the 5th night, I heard the tone. The binder had described it clinically, a single sustained note, approximately 440 hertz. Concert A, the universal tuning pitch. The frequency orchestras use to align themselves before a performance. But the binder hadn't described what the tone felt like, and the feeling was the thing that mattered. It came during a pause in the names, and it was pure in a way that no physical speaker should be able to produce. The tone so clean and unwavering that it seemed to bypass my ears entirely and arrive directly in the center of my skull, where it sat like a struck tuning fork in the exact middle of my consciousness. And it was warm. That's the part that scared me. The tone was warm, the way a hand on your back is warm, the way a voice saying your name with love is warm. It made me want to open my eyes. I didn't. I kept them closed. The tone lasted about 20 seconds. Then the voice resumed, and the names continued, and I sat on my cot with my eyes open and my heart hammering, and I understood for the first time that the binder's rules weren't arbitrary warnings. They were structural constraints on something that wanted, very badly, to interact with me. And the warmth of the tone was the most frightening thing I had ever experienced, because it meant that whatever was on the other end of this transmission was not hostile. It was inviting. Day 9. The question. The voice had been reading names for about 3 hours. I was at the desk, doing a crossword puzzle from a book I'd brought. A physical task to occupy my hands and foreground attention, exactly as the binder recommended. The voice was background noise. I'd gotten relatively good at letting it wash past me. Then the cadence changed. The voice paused. Not the tone pause. A different kind of pause, the kind a person makes when they look up from a page, and when it resumed, it was no longer reading names. Theo, it said. Do you still think about the night you didn't call your mother back? My pencil stopped on the crossword, the 7-letter word for a bird of prey. I remember that. I was stuck on it. I'd been thinking about kestrel, but it didn't fit. And then the voice said my name and asked me about my mother, and the crossword ceased to exist. My mother had called me on March 3rd, 2024, a Tuesday evening. I was in the ecology building at UM, preparing slides for a presentation the next morning. I saw her name on my phone and I let it go to voicemail because I was busy, and because my mother's calls tended to be long and circular, and I told myself I'd call her back after the presentation. I didn't. I called her back on Friday. She said she'd been having chest pains on Tuesday and had wanted to hear my voice. She'd gone to the ER. It was acid reflux. She was fine. She is fine. She's alive and healthy and living in Spokane. Nothing happened. The story has no tragic ending, and yet the guilt of those 3 days, the specific, irrational, completely disproportionate guilt of not answering the phone when my mother was scared, had been sitting in me for over a year like a splinter I couldn't reach. Nobody knew about it. I hadn't told anyone. It wasn't the kind of thing you tell people because it's too small to deserve telling and too persistent to stop mattering. And the voice on the radio knew. "She forgave you before you called back," the voice said. "But that's not really the question, is it? The question is whether you've forgiven yourself. I could help with that, Theo. Would you like me to?" The binder said, "Do not answer. The question is a door." I didn't answer, but for the first time I wanted to, not because the voice was compelling or hypnotic or supernaturally persuasive, because the offer was genuine. I could hear it. Whatever was speaking to me through that radio understood the specific texture of a guilt I'd never articulated, and it was offering to dissolve it. And the offer was not a trick. That's the part I need you to hear. It was not a trick. The warmth was real. The understanding was real. The voice knew me, and it was not lying about being able to help. The binder said not to answer because answering opens a door. But the binder didn't say what was behind the door was bad. It said, "There is nothing on the other side that you want." I sat in the cab and I didn't answer, and the voice went back to reading names, and I stared at my crossword, and the answer was Harrier. And I wrote it in, and my hand was steady because I was not going to let a disembodied voice on a Forest Service radio make me fall apart over a phone call I didn't return. But I want to be honest with you. The voice made an accurate offer and I declined it, and the declining cost me something. A small, private something that I've been carrying since that night, heavier than before because now I know there was a moment where it could have been lifted and I chose to keep it. That's what the voice does. It doesn't threaten you. It offers you something real. And the rules exist because accepting the offer is worse than carrying the weight, even though the weight is real, and the offer is real, and the relief would be real. I just don't know what the cost would have been. And that not knowing is its own kind of weight. The next section of the binder was headed, "The Mountain's Record." I hadn't read this section carefully the first night. I'd been focused on the radio rules, the immediate operational stuff. But after the question, I went back and read the whole binder again. Slowly. And this section stopped me. Spruce Peak is one of several high points in the northern Bitterroots that indigenous Salish Kootenai oral histories identify as a listening place. The term does not translate precisely. The closest English approximation per consultation with tribal historic preservation officers in 1994 is a place where the land remembers what passes through it. The Fire Lookout program was not aware of this designation when the tower was constructed in 1953. Spruce Peak was selected for its sight lines. It offers 360-degree visibility across approximately 200,000 acres of timber, and for no other reason. The radio phenomenon was first documented in 1971 by Lookout staff member Gerald Harkin, who reported anomalous transmissions on the primary frequency beginning at sunset. Harkin's report was filed as an equipment malfunction. The phenomenon was subsequently reported by every Lookout staffer assigned to Spruce Peak from 1971 onward. It was not formally investigated until after the death of David Purcell in 1993. The investigation, conducted jointly by the Forest Service and a consulting team that included a Salish Kootenai cultural liaison, produced the following working understanding, which is not a scientific explanation, but which has proven operationally reliable. Spruce Peak records. It has always recorded. Before the radio, it recorded in other ways. In the behavior of animals, in the patterns of weather, in the dreams of people who slept on its slopes. The radio gave it a format, a channel, a language. It began to use the radio the way water uses a stream bed, not because the stream bed created the water, but because the stream bed gave the water a shape. The names are the mountain's record of every person who has passed within its range of awareness. Not just hikers and lookout staff, everyone. People driving Highway 93 20 miles east, People in Derby, in Hamilton, in the Bitterroot Valley. The mountain is aware of them. It records their names. At night, when atmospheric conditions align with whatever mechanism it uses, it reads the record aloud. The names are not a threat. They are a catalog. The danger is not in the names. The danger is in the relationship between the listener and the record. The mountain is aware of the lookout in a way it is not aware of other people, because the lookout is on the mountain, inside its space, for an extended period. The mountain begins to record the lookout not just by name but by content. Memories, emotions, knowledge, identity. This is the source of the questions. The mountain is reading its own record of you back to you. If you respond, if you engage with the mountain's record of yourself, you confirm the record, you tell the mountain that its version of you is accurate. And the mountain, which does not distinguish between a record and the thing recorded, begins to treat its version of you as equivalent to you. There are now two versions, you in the cab and you in the record. The mountain does not need both. I read that section 3 times. Then I went out onto the catwalk and looked at the mountain beneath me. The granite and the spruce and the dark timber falling away in every direction. And I tried to understand what it meant to be standing on something that was recording me. Not watching, not listening, recording the way a tape deck records. Passively, mechanically, without intent or malice, simply capturing whatever is in range because that is its function, its nature. The mountain didn't want anything from me. It wasn't hungry or malevolent or strategic. It was a recording surface, and I was the signal, and the radio was the playback device. And the only danger was the possibility that I might confirm the recording's accuracy and thereby give the mountain permission to treat the copy as the original. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a monster. It was a property of the landscape, and as natural and amoral as erosion, as impersonal as gravity, and as dangerous as either, if you didn't respect it. Let me jump forward, because the thing about the middle weeks is that they were, paradoxically, the most peaceful time of my life. Once I understood the system, once I'd metabolized the binder, and accepted the phenomenon as a feature of the mountain rather than a threat, I settled into a routine that was genuinely satisfying. I did my job. I scanned for smoke. I reported weather. I maintained the tower. I read books. I watched sunsets that broke my heart and sunrises that put it back together. I listened to the names at night and I didn't engage, and I counted rivets and did crosswords and slept and woke, and the summer opened around me like something I'd been looking for without knowing it. The voice asked me questions 3 more times in those weeks. Once about a girl I'd dated in college. Do you think she was right about you being afraid of being known? And once about my father's death when I was 14. He wasn't disappointed in you at the end, Theo. He was afraid for you. Wouldn't you like to know why? And once, simply, aren't you lonely? I didn't answer any of them. But I want to tell you that the question about my father almost broke me. Almost. The voice knew things that could only have come from inside me, and it offered them back as gifts. And the gifts were real, and declining them was the hardest discipline I have ever practiced. But I want to tell you something else, something the binder didn't prepare me for, something that happened in the 7th week that changed the nature of everything. I was doing my morning scan, a slow 360-degree sweep with binoculars, checking for smoke, when I saw something on the northwestern ridge, about 2 miles out, a structure, small, dark, angular. I focused the binoculars. It was a tower, a fire lookout tower, small, old, partially collapsed. The cab was tilted at an angle, one wall missing. The steel legs buckled on the south side. It looked like it had been there for decades. Like weather and time had worked it over until it was more ruin than structure. I'd been scanning that ridge every morning for 7 weeks. There had been no tower. I checked the Forest Service maps. No tower was marked on the northwestern ridge. No tower had ever been built there, according to the Bitterroot National Forest Historical Lookout Inventory, which I had a copy of in my reference materials. Spruce Peak was the only lookout in this section of the forest. The nearest decommissioned tower was Black Bear Lookout, 14 miles to the northeast, and it had been dismantled in 1988. I radioed Packer. "There's a structure on the northwest ridge," I said. "Bearing 315, approximately 2 miles. Appears to be a fire lookout tower in advanced decay. It's not on my maps." Silence. Then, "Copy. Stand by." I stood by. 14 minutes. Then Packer came back. "Theo, is your binder accessible?" "Yes." "Turn to the section headed Reflections. It should be near the back. Read it now." I turned to the back of the binder. I'd skimmed this section on the first night and dismissed it as less relevant than the radio protocols. Now I read it carefully. Reflections. After extended occupation of the tower, typically 4 to 8 weeks, the lookout may observe structures in the surrounding landscape that are not present on any map. These structures will resemble the lookout tower in form, but will appear aged and deteriorated, as though they have existed for much longer than the Spruce Peak Tower itself. These are not physical structures. They are the mountain's record of the tower, projected onto the landscape the way the names are projected onto the radio frequency. The mountain has recorded the tower as it records everything within its range, and given enough time, it begins to play the recording back. The reflections are not dangerous in themselves. They cannot be reached on foot. Hikers who have attempted to approach them report that the structures remain at a constant apparent distance regardless of travel. They are images, not objects. However, the reflections indicate that the mountain's recording of the tower's current occupant is approaching completeness. When reflections appear, the mountain's record of you is detailed enough that it is beginning to generate a context for you. A tower for you to sit in, a landscape for you to look at. The mountain is building a place for its copy of you to live. This is the stage at which the nightly questions will intensify and the names list will begin to include names personally known to the lookout. You may hear names of family members, friends, or other individuals with emotional significance. This does not mean these people are in danger. It means the mountain's record of you now includes your record of them. Remain calm. Follow the radio protocols. Do not engage. The reflections will multiply over time. If you see more than 4, contact Packer immediately. I set the binder down. I went back to the catwalk. The ruined tower was still there on the ridge, tilted and dark, its broken cab catching the morning sun. One reflection. The mountain was building me a room. I want to stop here and say something directly to you, to whoever is listening to this. Because I think there's a temptation, hearing a story like this, to reduce it to a survival narrative. Guy goes to scary tower, scary things happen. Guy follows the rules. Guy survives. Like a video game. Follow the instructions. Get the good ending. But that's not what this was. That's not what the mountain was doing. The mountain was making a copy of me. A complete, accurate, detailed copy. My memories, my guilt, my loneliness, my love for my mother, my grief for my father, my specific and personal interior life. And it was doing this not to hurt me, but because that's what it does. It records. It's a listening place. And when I sat in that tower for weeks on end, the only human consciousness in its range for 12 sustained hours every night, it listened to me the way the ground listens to rain. It absorbed me. And the copy it was building was not a monster or a trap. It was me. A version of me that lived in the mountain the way the names lived in the radio, the way the tower reflections lived on the ridges. Permanent, recorded, part of the landscape. And the question, the real question, the one the binder was designed to prevent me from reaching, was whether that was a bad thing. Because here's what I was thinking, alone in that tower in the 7th week. What if the copy gets to put down the guilt? What if the version of me that lives in the mountain doesn't have to carry the $74,000, or the unreturned phone call, or the particular loneliness of being 26 and educated and uncertain in a country that has no use for uncertain people? What if the mountain offers me, through the record, a version of myself that is complete and known and held, not by a person, but by a place, by the land itself, by something so old and vast that my smallness would finally be proportionate to something rather than floating untethered in the void of a life that I could not seem to make feel like enough? That's the door. That's what's behind it. Not a monster, not annihilation, belonging. The chance to be fully known by something that will never forget you. And the binder says, there is nothing on the other side that you want. And I'm telling you, sitting in that tower in the 7th week, watching the mountain's copy of my tower standing on the far ridge like a mirror image in a dream, I wasn't sure the binder was right. Week 8, the names got personal. Theodore James Aldiss. That was me. My full legal name, the one on my birth certificate, the one nobody uses. It came about 4 hours after sunset, tucked into the list between a Maria Gonzalez Torres and a William Creedmoor, and the voice said it with the same flat cataloging neutrality it used for every name, and it went through me like voltage. The binder had warned me. My name on the list meant proximity, not danger. I was present on the mountain. I was being recorded. The name was a receipt, not a sentence. I held still. I counted rivets. 47. The next night, the names included my mother, Sharon Ann Aldiss. The night after that, my father, James Theodore Aldiss. My father, who had been dead for 12 years, whose name in the mouth of the mountain's voice sounded exactly like a name on a memorial, read at a ceremony I had never been given. And then, on the 4th night, the list included a name I did not expect. David Allen Purcell, the lookout who had died in 1993, the man who'd walked off the catwalk, whose name was on the list because he was still here, still recorded, still part of the mountain's memory. 32 years after his body was found in a drainage 4 miles west. His name came up again the next night, and the next, always once, tucked into the list, unremarkable. And I began to understand something that the binder hadn't spelled out, maybe because the authors hadn't known it, or maybe because they'd known it, and decided it was too disturbing to include. David Purcell hadn't just died on the mountain. He'd answered. He'd heard the question, whatever question the mountain had asked him, and he'd said yes. He'd confirmed the record. He'd told the mountain that its copy of him was accurate, and then, I believe this. I believe it the way I believe in gravity. The mountain had decided it didn't need both versions. The real David Purcell had walked off the catwalk, not because he was pushed or compelled or driven mad, because the version of him that lived in the mountain was more complete, more permanent, more real than the version standing in the cab. He'd felt it. The way you feel a draft from a door that's been opened. The copy was finished and it was better, and the original was redundant. And David Purcell, the physical, mortal, temporary David Purcell, had walked into the wilderness and laid down in a drainage and stopped. And the mountain still reads his name, every night, because it still has him. I don't know if that's a horror story or a love story. I don't know if being held in the memory of a mountain forever is a fate or a gift. I know that David Purcell's boots were still in the cab, which means he walked barefoot into the wilderness, which means he left behind everything that was his, and went to the place where the mountain's version of him lived. And I don't know if the last thing he felt was terror or relief or something that doesn't have a word because human beings weren't meant to feel it. August 14th. 4 reflections. I counted them at dawn, one on the northwestern ridge. The original, my familiar ruin. One to the southeast, on a bald granite slope, newer looking, only slightly decayed. One due south, barely visible, almost hidden in the tree line. And one to the northeast, close, maybe a mile. Clear and sharp in the morning light, its cab intact, its windows reflecting the sun. 4 reflections. The mountain had built me 4 towers, 4 contexts, 4 rooms for the copy of Theo Aldiss to look out from. The binder said, "If you see more than 4, contact Packer immediately." I contacted Packer immediately. 4 reflections, I said. Copy. Her voice was tight. Theo, I'm going to ask you a question and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Have you responded to the voice at any point? Any verbal response, any acknowledgement, even a whisper? No. Have you written down any names? No. Have you opened your eyes during a tone? No. Pause. I could hear wind on her end. She was outside. Okay, she said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in the tower for 3 more days. Your season was supposed to run until September 1st, but we're pulling you early. I'll have the mule team at the trailhead on the 17th. You hike out at first light on the 17th. Copy? Copy. Theo, 3 more nights. Follow every protocol. Do not engage. Do not answer any question, no matter what it asks. And on the night of the 16th, your last night, I need you to do something that's not in the binder. What? At midnight, I need you to read a name into the radio. Just one name. I'll give it to you now. Get a pen. I got a pen. She gave me a name. Marguerite Iona Packer. That's my mother, Packer said. She died in 2019. She never set foot in the Bitterroots. She has no connection to Spruce Peak or to you or to any part of this. I don't understand. The binder says never to key the mic, never to respond. I know what the binder says. I helped write it. And I'm telling you that on your last night at midnight, you read that name into the radio, just the name, nothing else. Then you release the mic and you don't touch it again until morning. Why? Packer was quiet for a long time. I could hear the wind and faintly a vehicle engine. She was at the ranger station. Because the mountain takes what it's given, she said, and I need to give it something. You don't need to understand, Theo. You need to do it. Your copy is almost finished. 4 reflections means the mountain is 90% done building a place for you. When it finishes, 5 reflections, maybe 6. The questions stop being questions. They become invitations. And the invitations become very hard to decline. What happens if I decline them? You leave, you hike out, you go back to your life. The copy stays on the mountain, incomplete, and the mountain reads your name every night in a list of everyone it's ever known, and you go on being you, and that's fine. That's the outcome we want. And the name? Your mother? Another long pause. My mother was the most complete person I ever knew, Packer said. If the mountain records her, even from just a name spoken into its frequency, it gets something so whole and so much bigger than one lookout's 26 years that maybe, it shifts its attention. Find something more interesting than finishing your copy. That's the theory. It's worked twice before. Twice. Out of 11 times. It's not a great batting average, but it's the play we've got. Do you have the name? Marguerite Iona Packer. Good. Midnight the 16th. I'll see you on the 17th. She signed off. I sat in the cab with the name written on a scrap of paper, and I looked at the 4 towers on the surrounding ridges, and they looked back at me with their empty windows, and I understood that I was in a negotiation with a landscape, that the stakes were my selfhood, and that my best available strategy was to feed the mountain someone else's mother and hope it was enough of a distraction for me to get down the trail before it finished building my room. 3 more nights. The first night, August 14th. The voice asked me about my father again. Not the same question. A new one. More specific. Your father was writing you a letter when he died. He never finished it. Would you like to know what it said? My father died of a heart attack in the garage of our house in Spokane on a Saturday afternoon in November 2012. I was 14. I came home from a friend's house and found him. There was no letter. There was nothing in his hands. There was a coffee cup and a circular saw and a piece of plywood he'd been cutting for a shelf he was building in my bedroom. But after the funeral, my mother found a legal pad in his nightstand with my name at the top and 2 paragraphs of writing that she read once and put away and never showed me and never spoke about. I knew about it because I'd seen her holding it through a crack in her bedroom door, and I'd watched her face while she read it, and her face had done something I'd never been able to identify. A kind of inward collapse that was not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something like recognition. I never asked her about it. She never offered. 14 years. The letter was a silence that lived between us, and the voice on the radio knew about it, and it was offering to fill the silence, and the offer was real. I pressed my palms against my thighs and I counted rivets. 47. He wasn't writing about what you think, the voice said. It wasn't advice, it wasn't an apology, it was a description. He was trying to describe you, Theo, the way you looked when you were concentrating, the way you held a pencil. He was trying to get you down on paper because he had a feeling he was going to lose you, not to death, but to time, to the natural and unbearable process of a child becoming someone the parent can no longer fully see. He wanted to record you before you changed. The voice paused. He wanted what the mountain wants, just to keep you. I did not answer. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, and I did not answer. The second night, August 15th. I opened my eyes during the tone. I know. The binder said don't. Packer said don't. Every protocol, every rule, every piece of accumulated institutional knowledge said close your eyes and keep them closed and do not look at what the mountain shows you during the 440 hertz tone. I opened them, and what I saw was this. The cab was gone. The tower was gone. I was standing. Not sitting, standing, though I had been sitting on my cot when I closed my eyes. On the summit of Spruce Peak, barefoot on granite, under a sky that was not the sky I knew. The stars were wrong, not rearranged, not alien. More. There were more of them. The sky was dense with light packed so thick that the darkness between stars was barely there, and the mountains were visible in every direction, and they were named. I could feel their names the way you feel temperature. Each peak and ridge and drainage had an identity that was pressing against my awareness, wanting to be acknowledged, and the names were not English or Salish or any human language. They were older. They were the names the mountains had before anything with a mouth existed to name them. And on every ridge, in every direction, there was a tower. Hundreds of towers. Thousands. Some old, some new, some ruined, some intact. An infinite network of lookout towers covering every high point in the visible landscape. And in every tower, a faint warm light. And in every light, a figure, sitting, looking out. Recorded. Kept. Held in the mountain's memory the way a name is held on a page. The tone ended. I was on my cot. The cab was around me. The stars through the windows were the normal stars, spread thin and familiar. But I knew what I'd seen. The mountain's library. The place where it keeps everyone it has ever fully recorded. The towers on the ridges. My 4 reflections. Were not copies of my tower. They were shelves. The mountain was building me a shelf. And the figures in the other towers, the thousands of warm lights stretching to every horizon, were everyone who had ever said yes. Everyone who had ever answered the question and confirmed the record and let the mountain finish the copy and stepped out of themselves and into the version that the land remembered. David Purcell was in one of those towers. I was sure of it. Sitting in his cab, looking out at the mountains through windows that weren't glass but something older. Something that had been transparent since before silicon was sand. He wasn't suffering. I knew that too. I knew it with the certainty that the tone had left in me like a residue, a warmth that wouldn't fully cool. He was home. Last night, August 16th, midnight. I sat at the desk with the scrap of paper. The radio was on. The voice was reading names. The four reflections were visible through the windows, faintly lit by starlight, and I thought I could see a fifth forming to the west. A shimmer on a ridgeline, the suggestion of angles, the beginning of a new shelf. I picked up the mic. My hand was slick with sweat. The binder said never to key the mic. The binder said the voice was a door. The binder said do not engage. Packer had said to read the name. Packer had helped write the binder, and she was telling me to break its central rule. I thought about David Purcell. I thought about my father's letter. I thought about the version of me that was almost finished, sitting in a tower on a ridge somewhere in the mountain's memory, looking out at a sky with too many stars, carrying all my guilt and loneliness and knowledge and love, but carrying it in a place where it was known, where it was part of the landscape, where it would never be lost or forgotten or trivialized. I keyed the mic. Marguerite Iona Packer, I said. The voice stopped. The silence was absolute, not radio silence. I've heard radio silence, the faint hiss of empty frequency. This was silence, the kind that has texture, the kind you can feel against your skin like humidity. The mountain was listening, not recording, listening. There's a difference, and I felt it. The silence lasted 11 seconds, I counted. Then the voice came back. But it was different. The flat cataloging neutrality was gone. In its place was something I can only describe as attention. The voice spoke one word. Who? Not a question from a list. Not a personal probe designed to open a door in me. A genuine question. Curiosity. The mountain had heard a name it didn't know. A name with no proximity, no connection, no basis in any recorded signal it had ever received. And it wanted to know more. I released the mic. I put it down. I didn't say another word. The voice said, "Who?" 2 more times. Then it went back to reading names. But the cadence was different. Faster, slightly, as though the list was being searched rather than recited. And my name didn't come up. Neither did my mother's or my father's. The personal names were gone. The mountain was looking for Marguerite Iona Packer in its records and not finding her, and this was apparently interesting enough to divert its attention from the almost finished copy of a 26-year-old ecologist who was sitting in its cab with tears running down his face, grieving something he couldn't name. I didn't sleep. I sat in the cab and I listened to the names, and they were all strangers again. A river of strangers, and the voice was searching. And outside the windows, the 5 reflections. 5 now. The western one had solidified, stood on their ridges like sentinels of an unfinished project. And I watched the sky lighten. And at dawn I packed my bag, and I went down the mountain. Packer was at the trailhead, leaning against a Forest Service truck, drinking coffee from a thermos. She looked at me the way you look at someone coming out of surgery, searching for damage, cataloging what's different. "You read the name," she said. I read it. And? It asked who. 3 times. Something moved across her face. Not relief. Something more complicated. Something that had gratitude and grief and a very old exhaustion braided together so tightly that I couldn't separate them. "Good," she said. "That's good. She'll keep it busy for a while." "Your mother." My mother was a force of nature. The mountain's going to be looking for her for a long time, and it's not going to find her because she was never here, and that's going to bother it, because the mountain doesn't encounter things it can't record. She's a name without a file, a catalog entry with no content. It'll keep reaching for her. And that protects the next lookout. It buys time. The mountain gets distracted. The reflections fade. The copy of you degrades because the mountain's attention has moved. By next season, the new lookout starts fresh. And my copy? Packer looked at me steadily. Your copy is up there. Incomplete. Missing the last 10%. Missing whatever it is that makes a person whole enough for the mountain to treat them as real. It'll sit in one of those towers and it'll look out at the mountains and it'll be almost you. And the mountain will read your name every night, but it'll read it the way it reads the name of everyone who was close but never finished. Just a name, not a person. I got in the truck. Packer drove us down the gravel road toward Derby. The mountains were enormous and green, and the morning light was golden, and the world was beautiful in the way that it is always beautiful when you've just escaped something you're not sure you wanted to escape. That was 8 months ago. I'm in Missoula now. I took the nonprofit job in Bozeman, the $38,000 a year one, and moved across the state and got a roommate and started making payments on the loans and built a life that is small and ordinary and mine. I called my mother the day I came down from the mountain, and I stayed on the phone for 2 hours, and I told her about the tower and the view and the stars, but not about the voice, and not about the names, and not about my father's letter. I still haven't asked her about the letter. I don't think I will. Some silences are structural. They bear weight. You take them out and the house comes down. But here's what I need to tell you. The reason I'm saying all of this. 3 weeks ago, I was driving home from work on Highway 93. It was just after sunset. The Bitterroots were dark against the western sky, a wall of mountains running north to south, and somewhere in that wall, 40 miles away, Spruce Peak was standing above the tree line with its tower and its radio and its new lookout. A woman named Chen, Packer told me, a forestry student from Oregon, her first season. I had the car radio on, NPR, a story about water rights in the Columbia Basin, normal. And then, for about 4 seconds, the broadcast cut to static, and in the static, very faintly, like hearing a conversation through a wall, I heard the voice. One name. Theodore James Aldiss. Then NPR came back. Water rights. Normal. I pulled over. I sat on the shoulder of Highway 93 with my hazards on, and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and I breathed. The mountain is still reading my name. I'm 90% recorded, 90% kept. And the unfinished copy of me is sitting in an unfinished tower on a ridge that doesn't exist on any map, looking out at mountains that have too many stars. And every night the voice says my name and the copy hears it, and the copy is waiting for the last 10%, the part that would make it whole, the part that I took with me when I walked down the trail on August 17th. I'm not going back. I want you to know that. I am not going back to that mountain. But I also want you to know that sometimes, late at night, in the apartment in Bozeman with my roommate asleep in the next room and the traffic on Main Street fading to nothing, and the silence of a small Montana city settling over everything like snow. Sometimes, in that silence, I hear the tone, the 440 hertz hum, concert A, and it's warm, and it knows me. And I close my eyes the way the binder taught me. And I keep them closed. But every time it takes a little longer to want to.